Oh, you see the good. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So folks, again, thank you for spending part of your afternoon with us. This will be the last of our pre-scheduled sessions from the spring workshop. This will be the 9th one. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to see them. When we get this one done, early next week, I'll have this and the one from last week all set up online, and I will send out the links so that everybody has the appropriate links to watch these again, or if other folks from your contact list want to see them and you still get credits, they can do so. Any questions, please feel free to email me or give me a call. Also, I've got a couple of other webinars through our Nerd Coffee program coming up.
Come here for a second, please.
In January. So stay tuned for those. Those should be about an hour each. And the topic there is steel bridges for forest roads. A couple of different webinars on that. So stay tuned. Please, everybody on this meeting today, don't forget to email Cindy Pascal at cpascal@maine.edu that you were here, and that makes sure that we have the right information so Cindy can send you a certificate. During the course of today, if you have a question or a comment, put it in the chat function. If you send it to either everyone or myself or Skip Lyle, Skip's going to try to work through those as we go. So with that, I'll be quiet, and Skip, it's all yours.
Okay. So, hi everybody. Thanks for joining. Can you see me, or just my slides?
You can just see your screen right now.
Is that what you want, or do you want to see me as well?
Well, if folks want to see Skip, if you click on the list of participants, you should be able to you can see who's talking. There's a button you can click that you can see who's talking. And like right now, I'm looking at Skip's screen. But in the upper right-hand corner of my screen, I see Skip's face.
Okay.
Talking to me.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Thanks, Ray. Thanks for having me.
Well, appreciate your time, Skip.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just let me start by having a drink. I want to start by just mentioning some terms, just to be clear. I coined the term Beaver Deceiver in 1995. It's very popular. People love rhymes. And so today it's taken off, much like, say, Kleenex has to represent every type of tissue. And so what that means is it's misused terribly, which is nothing I can do about. But, for our purposes, we should be clear on the proper definition. So I'm basically the only person in the world who builds authentic beaver deceivers. And they've been changing, and getting better ever since 1995. So the modern ones are very different. And I'll show you pictures of all of them. I also just wanted to begin by saying, stating that the main point of what I do and what I want to convey here is that killing beavers guarantees that the conflict will never go away. And unfortunately, the conflict has not gone away since the return of beavers from the fur trade. Roughly 50 or 75 years, depending on where you are. And so throughout most of that time, we've just clung to this notion that the best way to solve the problem is killing beavers and cleaning culverts with backhoes and such. And for some reason, generally speaking, we haven't gotten away from that. And that is a tremendously inefficient process that, as I said, guarantees you'll never solve the problem and you'll spend a tremendous amount of effort and money fighting it. In addition, because beavers are just, I think of them as the most valuable ecologically, and you might say hydrologically, most valuable species we have. They just are so important to ecosystems, and to effectively protect a culvert, you have to kill all the beavers in the vicinity in perpetuity. So you're basically extirpating the most important species from the area of every conflict point if you do it effectively, which of course doesn't happen that often, but so it's a bad way to go for those two reasons. And so just as a result of that, I mean, I'm a wildlife biologist, and throughout my life, my passion has been to improve wildlife habitats. And I feel, and that's why I've pursued, here's another term for you. I use a general term, flow device, for all types of flow devices. And so I've pursued this, trying to master this really complicated challenge, and to make the best possible flow devices, because I believe there's just no better way to improve wildlife habitats than by keeping live beavers in them. And of course, that benefits everybody. I mean, almost all of our game animals, and many of our fur bearers, if your concerns are consumptive, all those species use these wetlands a lot. And of course, they're beautiful places to watch wildlife if you're just interested in that and not harvesting it. And of course, when I was a kid, it was always the best place to fish for brook trout as well. So that's where I pursued it. But in for a long time, I've also recognized that it might be the best economic opportunity we have, because solving this problem in a long-term manner really saves a lot of money. So having said that, I'll start with some slides, and the first few slides are again along the lines of an introduction, and then I'll get into some pictures of flow devices. Hey, Emma, excuse me. When I hit the forward button, it doesn't change the slide I'm looking at. Okay, now it will. Okay, thank you. Okay, there we go. Thank God my daughter's here, right? So this is my company logo, and I'm based in Vermont, but I work around the world. I've done much of my career has been in Maine, where I went to graduate school and worked for 6.5 years for the Penobscot Indian Nation, and I worked there every year as well. Most of my work is in the Northeast, but I'll travel anywhere. I've been to Europe many times, and Canada. So I just try to use this picture to capture the absolute amazing richness of these habitats that beavers create, maintain, and improve. Another point you can make with this slide is you can see the standing dead timber. And that's, as most of you probably know, is very common in modern beaver flowages. There's another term that I first encountered when I moved to Maine, and these wetlands are so unique, they really deserve their own name. So I always use that term as a type of wetland. So one of the key points here is that beaver dams are in a constant state of decay, made of organic materials, and they don't last long in the absence of beavers to maintain them. So when beavers were extirpated for hundreds of years during the fur trade, all of their flowages, the natural condition of a flowage is an open marsh. We don't have trees that grow in the water. They all drained because of the absence of beavers and became forested during that several 100-year period that beavers were gone. And God knows the ecological harm that did, and the species that might have been lost during that process. So when you see standing dead timber in wetlands today or flowages, it's an indication of the arrival of Europeans 400 years ago and the start of the fur trade. So it's kind of neat, actually. I love these standing dead timber as micro habitats for a lot of wildlife. But just know that we're lucky to be enjoying it. It's just great bird purchase for one thing, but it's a fleeting feature as these trees fall over. I don't think we're going to have another fur trade. And also, it's you often people talk about the enormous loss of timber value represented by the flooding that beavers do. But in reality, there was no timber there before the fur trade. And so there's absolutely no net loss of timber. And now there's one of those dams that would decay in the absence of beavers, and a wetland that would drain in New Hampshire. And another important point is that, a couple points. Beavers are damming the exact same places today that they dammed for 10 or 12,000 years between the retreat of the glaciers and the beginning of the fur trade. So beaver damming habitat is low gradient areas on small streams, essentially low energy sites where the dams don't get destroyed constantly by high flows, and where the damming effort, where it's flat, is rewarded by a decent sized habitat or wetland or flowage. And so you'll never, in a picture like this, which is in southern Vermont, that's a very big flowage there. And it was also flooded early in the return of beavers, maybe in say 1940 or something, because there's very little standing dead timber. It's mostly just an open, though dry marsh right now, because the beavers aren't there. They haven't dammed it. They've left or been trapped out or something. But you'll never see a flowage on any of those hillsides. And so what that means is that the beaver damming habitat only represents 1.5%, maybe 2%, depending. It's going to be less in mountainous areas and more in flat areas, but a very, very small percentage of the landscape, and that's not going to change. And so that also means that the number of conflict points or chronic conflict points, in any given town is very small. The average might be 6, and it varies quite a bit. And so the problem is not overwhelming in scale or scope, unless, of course, we don't check off those conflict points. It's easy to eliminate 6 in a town, which I could do in a week or two for decades. But if you don't eliminate them and you just kill the beavers, then each one of those conflict points over the years and decades might represent 100 conflicts. And so then it does become somewhat overwhelming. But so we're lucky that they in this respect, in respect to the conflict, that beavers only occupy a small percentage of the landscape, and it's a manageable problem as long as you use high quality flow devices and not low quality ones, and don't just rely on killing regimes. And so one reason killing is going to never solve the problem is because beavers are economists, and they're great explorers of the landscape, and what they're looking for is high quality habitats. And as territorial animals, they are frequently looking for unoccupied habitats. So when we kill beavers, we're creating an unoccupied habitat, a void. And when we build roads and railroads and put a tiny little hole in it, usually a culvert, then we're creating a high quality habitat, almost regardless of the other variables like food availability, because it's such an ideal damming site. And you have this massive man-made dam that this train is sitting on in a little tiny hole. So what that is a beaver magnet. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be one of the first places on the landscape that they dam. That's never going to change unless it's protected. And this is down at Fort Dix in New Jersey, where I did some work. And it allows me to make the point that as a society, we've really been at war with wetlands and the beavers as well. But we just, for some reason, we as an agricultural society, perhaps for a long time, we want the wetlands were a real enemy, and they've all been drained just about everywhere. I find ditches where they've been drained by the old farmers, primarily, even in the most rural areas. And then even today, so many, this would be ancient beaver habitat, low grading areas, small streams, automatically ancient beaver habitat. And it's frequently been destroyed, often forever, just because we like to keep things in fields. So there's just enormous opportunities like this everywhere to allow beavers to return the landscape to its ancient form in these sites and to create some really wonderful wildlife habitats. But that all starts with being able to protect the culverts. Just a couple images, again, as many of you are aware of that sort of represent the inefficiency of not protecting culverts. And you often have to ramrod them like this with the log truck. This is up in northern Maine. And a backhoe. And, this is just happening in everywhere, every town in New England and many in the North America. And as a result, the culverts where I work are often really beat up and damaged as well. So now this is the beginning of the history of the Beaver Deceiver. As I said, I worked at the Penobscot Nation, and I started in 1995. And the first thing they asked me to do, they had a big problem with clogged culverts, and they said, go out and try to figure something out, please. And so this is one of my very first and very lame attempts. I always tell people, don't, if you can, hire a skilled professional, because there's a lot to this. But I didn't take my own advice, because I went out and built a lot of bad flow devices initially. And so you see that wing, if you will, to the right side of this awful fence. And that's, some of you may have heard of the trapezoidal fence concept, and that's where it all began in 1995. I knew nothing about pipe systems, and so I was sort of initially, in the first few years, I was limited to just building fences. And so the idea of the trapezoid is just to create the most unnatural direction on the sides of a beaver dam. And then you have to make, in addition, but still beavers will dam around a very big fence. And so you have to make the trapezoid really big. And it was a pretty good flow device and a pretty good concept for its time. But that was a long time ago. Unfortunately, because of the internet and, other people, not me, they're still promoting this, and a lot of people are using it all over the place, and it doesn't, and it's in much smaller versions, and they don't have a chance. There's nothing miraculous about a trapezoid. There's another one, but again, it had to be big. But eventually the beavers dammed around this, and I had to add pipe systems. Now in my modern Beaver Deceivers, everything is a pipe system. Hey, there's Emma. There's the person who's just helping me. This dates this photograph to about 1997, down in Stockton Springs. But the beavers, obviously, they could dam around that pretty easily. It's better than nothing, but and so this is not me. I drive around the landscape and I see these trapezoids everywhere, and I feel very guilty for ever going public with a concept, because again, nothing miraculous about it. That shape does nothing, especially when it's a very tiny fence. They're just going to dam around it. So that's a site, unfortunately, like so many hundreds, if not thousands, where the only thing that the so-called flow device will do is to hold the beavers off long enough to get a trapper there and to kill all the beavers. So it's not really a flow device, and it doesn't really solve the problem. It's better than having a dam inside the culvert, but that's all I can say about it. And it forces you to eliminate this incredibly valuable species from the general vicinity. So the promise of flow devices is not realized. Here's another one, little trapezoidal shape. sorry, everybody. Yeah, never had a chance. And this is just an example of what you often see road crews doing. I mean, those are their versions of flow devices. And of course, all that's saying is, well, it's something until we kill the beavers. But if you get a high flow, just with all that junk on a culvert, you've eliminated the culvert capacity, even in the absence of beavers, by 80% or something. So you're still going to get a washed out road. So this is one of my great frustrations, is that it's taken me a long time to understand the qualitative threshold and the threshold of design sophistication that you have to surpass if you're going to have a chance of having your flow device work and actually protecting a culvert in a long-term manner. And it's very hard to get that point across. Everybody is stubborn, I think, like I was when I was beginning, and just thinks, and plus without the experience, you just don't realize, how much is required to actually be successful. And people are stubborn, and they like to do things themselves. But if we're going to solve the problem, I'm afraid we have to get away from that. And so in 1997, I invented this form of pipe system, which you see widely used now. And the only thing that's unique about it is to filter. I use the word filter because I'm trying to filter water in and filter beavers out at the end of the pipe. So that's where the deception happens, or where you're essentially trying to sneak water away from the beavers into the pipe. And it requires a pretty big and pretty sophisticated filter in order to do that. And it has to be set up correctly, and every site's different. But this is the basic concept. We call it a caster master, and the filter is called a round fence filter. And unfortunately, that name the design has been adopted by many people, and they've changed the name and on the internet, and you'll see it called the flexible pond leveler, or the pond leveler. But it all started here. This was the first flow device of this design. It started at the Penobscot Nation, and it doesn't go by those names, if you want to be accurate. There's the round fence filter and my old lab. So that was a hell of a good filter, again, for its time, but I've long since moved on to much better ones. And you also notice that this is a fence that's protecting a culvert, which the beavers would dam across that fence, but then you can still hold the water down by sneaking the water away from them through the pipe. And big pipes are very, very important. Over the years, I've just used bigger and bigger pipes and bigger filters. And also this is in the early years when I was using raw steel fencing, and our eastern waters are very acidic, and they dissolve raw steel very quickly. And so I've long since moved on to epoxy coated wire that'll last decades, like this, which is, green. And comes, I think they primarily use it in bridge construction in the north. And this happens to be a PVC pipe, but I use both PVC pipes and polyethylene pipes, depending on the site. And this is sort of an intermediary design where I was still building trapezoids, but adding the pipe systems to it. And the trapezoids have already gotten much smaller, because once you have a high quality pipe system, you don't need to build a big fence. So you can save a lot of work that way. It's much easier to build a small fence. And of course, it doesn't have to be trapezoidal. And so now everything is rectilinear or square. I call the fence on the culvert a receiver fence because it's receiving the pipe system. And again, this is an intermediary design where I'm still using the round fence, but it's not going to last for long. Here's another a feature of pipe systems that makes them very vulnerable to beavers. You get a pressure differential and a whirlpool develops. And no matter how good your system is, if that happens, the beavers are going to bury your filter because the beavers do very little deductive reasoning, which is fortunate for us. And so they're not very smart at all by human standards, but they will, if you don't eliminate damming stimuli, environmental stimuli like the sound, the feel, and the look of a leak, then you will not defeat them. And so there's nothing worse than a whirlpool like this. So this is my son Forrest a long time ago, and this is one of our early attempts at what has become known as a whirlpool break over the top of the pipe. And so again, a long time ago, I started transitioning to square fences because I can make them much bigger. There's much more design flexibility than with a round fence. And this is sort of two different stages in different years. I was just sort of figuring out the best way to do it. I guess I still am. I do it in a lot of different ways with that framing. But the one on the left, it does have a wooden frame, but it happens to be underwater. And the one on the right is more modern and has a frame at the top, which is the way I do all of them now. And you'll also notice on both of them that there's inner walls of fencing. And that is because beavers come in all sizes. And so small beavers can go through that 6-inch mesh and pull a lot of damming debris with them. And so those what I call misery multipliers, those inner layers of fencing, just complicate the damming environment and make it uneconomical for the beavers. Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah, there we go. There's another early model whirlpool break on an underwater square fence filter. This is a little bit more recent, a bigger square fence filter, and that's actually an 18-inch diameter pipe. So I'm using a lot of those these days, and as you can see, a very simple, relatively easy to build receiver fence on the culvert. And I'm going to show you a series of pictures now just to emphasize the ecological importance and potential of beaver deceivers. And this is in Maine, in Montville. But without the flow device to protect the culvert, you have to kill those beavers. And all of them, it only takes one beaver to dam a culvert, and all future beavers. And so that wetland would be lost, and there's some upstream wetlands associated with it that would be lost. And these wetlands are just invaluable wildlife habitats, and for many reasons, but one of which is that they're very rare. They're very, very rare on the landscape. So everyone's important to maintain or to create, or to allow the beavers to create if possible. And again, you see the dam, the upstream dam, a huge wetland up there. Again, that would be drained as the dam decayed once the beavers were killed without a non-lethal defense of the downstream culvert. And this is a picture from the Penobscot Nation. You can see the road near the top of the picture and the series of beaver dams, but the beavers and a huge wetland at the bottom of the screen. And that was about a 50-acre wetland. And the beavers were living up there. Again, I'm going to emphasize that they're territorial, because it gets very confusing to people who feel a great need to, quote unquote, manage populations when it's usually only one family of beavers, and they defend relatively large territories from other beavers. So you never get big densities like you might say with deer. Anyway, the beavers were traveling from that upper wetland all the way down and clogging the road culvert there. And so a lethal approach there would have meant ultimately the draining of at least 50 acres of wetlands. So it's a big deal. These wetlands are full of ducks and moose and deer and bear and bald eagles now. And this is another site, Penobscot site in Alton, just north of Bangor. And just upstream is about an 80-acre wetland that's maintained by one family of beavers. So again, and they were coming down too and clogging this culvert. And another important and beautiful upstream wetland. This is in southern New Hampshire. And this is too in Maine, down near Ellsworth, a big, beautiful upstream wetland. You can see it's the dam is just above that pipe system to the left. And so, you know, one of the strengths of the Beaver Deceiver strategy that we use is it's very flexible. The topography and the the watershed, the substrate, the culverts, everything is different at every site, and so we mold our flow devices to fit the site. So we have the perfect, what we try to achieve or realize as the perfect flow device for any given site, and a lot of people think that these are overbuilt, and to me, they're the bare minimum of what will work in the long-term presence of beavers with very, very little maintenance and without ever having to kill a beaver. But it's very important to be able to, because of a lot of experience, to be able to mold the flow devices to fit the site. This is just kind of a fun picture. This is from Fort Dix again, down in New Jersey. And you can see the beaver chew on the tree. Well, as you know, beavers don't climb trees very well. So I see this at quite a few sites. Just an indication that once upon a time, or many, many times, the culvert was clogged and the water was up that high, and it became a very, very threatening and expensive issue to resolve. And we do the same thing at what I call regular beaver dams, but without the need for a so-called receiver fence. The fence you see here to the left is just to sort of discourage beavers from messing around at the downstream end of that pipe. And this is a Vermont flowage with a PVC pipe. And one in New Hampshire. You can see how I've pinned down all the framing and the pipe. The pipes are very buoyant with rocks. It was just so rocky here, I couldn't drive posts. So there's always a way to do this, no matter what. Again, Fort Dix, there's a shooting range for 50 cal. Those revetments at the top of the screen are target areas. And I included this slide just because to, again, reemphasize the importance of the epoxy coating. And you might notice on the receiver fence here, you see it's at every spot weld, it looks kind of black. That's because I also spray every spot weld with a black epoxy spray, because they do not get those very well at the factory. And every one of them has a little spot of rust on them. So if you want your flow device to last for decades, that's the sort of thing you have to do. And of course, the culvert indicates why a galvanized fencing or galvanized culverts do not last very long and are not a good idea. And that's because of the acidic water. And then there's very tight little spots where there's not much room to build your system, but you can always do something. Always do something. Here's another tight one, and that's me enjoying the muck.
Skip, I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Yep.
We've got about maybe a couple minutes left.
Okay.
And I see there's a question in the chat box there.
You want me to launch into the question and answer period right now, Ray?
If you could, yeah, we've got, right now there's only one question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you want to answer that, and then.
Can you read it to me? Because I can keep looking at my slides. I don't see the chat box on my screen right now.
Okay. The question is there a lot of damage from ice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And no, I mean, these things, I'm working in a cold climb almost all the time, and they are very, very well made. So no, no, hardly any damage. The only time I get damage is on a filter that sort of sits right near the surface, and then that, that's not so good. So I either try to get them in deeper water sites. I try to get the filter under the ice, but the receiver fence frames are really well made, and they can take a hell of a beating. And plus, beaver damming habitat, again, is defined as small streams. So you don't get massive flows, generally speaking. I have lost some flow devices entirely during, massive hurricane rains down in Virginia, where, the entire road is gone. Everything's gone. Okay. You want me to keep showing a few more slides?
We've got another couple of questions.
Oh yeah, okay. If you want me to do that, I tell you what, if you read them, I can just keep forwarding my slides.
Yep, nope, that's fine.
As you do.
Got one. How often do you need to put mesh under the box or at the downstream end of the culverts, and under what circumstances?
Yeah, the upstream end is the critical point, and I don't generally do too much on the downstream end. You do have to, on the receiver fence, I'll do a little something, but it's never needs to be as elaborate as the upstream end. And on a receiver fence, you need to have a floor, because the beavers will dig like crazy sometimes. They've often been accustomed to traveling through the culvert, and they want to get in there, or they've been accustomed to damming inside the culvert. But the digging on the filter end is very, very rare. And so I oftentimes will not use a floor on those.
Okay.
This is an interesting site. Just quickly, before you read that question, I'll just explain this, and I'll show you the pictures. See, beavers, even when they can't make a dam, they have tremendous values. They lend tremendous values to a wetland. And the lodge is one of those. It's just a great microhabitat. And this happens to be a wetland that didn't have any standing dead timber. There weren't any perches for birds. And so over the days as I worked here, I took these photographs of 4 different species of birds using that lodge as a perch place. Tree swallows, redwing, a robin, a kingbird. And then I came the next spring, and a goose was nesting on it. So just amazing value in that little mound. And that's the end of the show. Okay, Ray, what's the question?
Next question, do you find there is a conflict between beaver and cold water fisheries? Oxygen levels in a heat sink and migration upstream.
I don't. I know a lot of people do. I largely dismiss it. Sorry, folks. I mean, I know, just as my childhood experiences, I know how valuable those habitats were and are for brook trout. So tremendous value for that species. And then you just have to keep reminding yourself that all of our native wildlife, all of our native fishes evolved in the presence of beavers. And they were all thriving like they haven't thrived since when Europeans arrived here 400 years ago. So it works out. It works out very well, one way or another. I know it's a big issue now with things like salmon. Unfortunately, that's because we've decimated these species to such a degree that we just have a few left, and we're trying to have them recover, and we can't have any impediments whatsoever. But in a normal time, well, first of all, again, beaver dams are high in the watershed, or another way of saying that is they're in very small watersheds. So it's quite, and I'm not a salmon expert, but it's quite possible that a lot of the spawning, if not all of it, occurs, below those places in larger streams. And then if you look at a beaver, think about a beaver dam over time, they come and they go. They're incredibly dynamic habitats. And so there may be years, when the fish can't get upstream, say, to a certain point. But then there'll be a point where you have a big flood or something and the dam will be breached, and then those genetic flows take place again. And so it all works out well.
Okay. We have another question, says some of the pipes look like they're flowing uphill.
Yeah.
Yep, they seem to be going up over the dams. How does that work?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They frequently are. It's just, the water, as the water rises in the wetland, it's also coming up the pipe. It's just rising up in the pipe, just like everywhere else. And when it gets to that, to a certain point, it'll flow out of the pipe. So it doesn't need to be pressurized or anything.
Okay. That's all the questions I have currently, Skip.
Okay. Well, do we have any time?
Well,
anything I left vague?
I don't know. For me, that was a good presentation. I appreciate your thoughts and your time. And
thank you.
wait a minute.
Great. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What about the beaver control devices that are just pipes, one extending from the culvert and one, one extending from the culvert and one at the pond and making a T, sometimes with perforations?
I want to approach this issue any different than I do, than what I've showed you, and I don't like anything else that's out there, and I'm familiar with most of it. So, and one thing I should say is that, or repeat, I've been at this for 25 years, and it's still a challenge to me. And there's just so much to consider, so many variables. I haven't even mentioned the things like on busy roads, I build in doors, for larger animals like snapping turtles and beavers to get through, because I don't want to force them into the highway. And then there's another issue is that large beavers can get stuck in the 6-inch mesh. And so that's just, and just die a miserable death. And so I have to design to try to avoid that. So there's just so many considerations. And, you're not going to solve this problem. You're just going to extend its life if you don't use high quality flow devices. And so if you can afford it, I'd encourage you to hire me. I know that sounds self-serving, but I really want to solve people's problems. And if you do that, and yet you want to learn, and you want to, say you're a big timber company and you're hoping to become more self-sufficient. I think these things are tremendous investments. And that reminds me of something else I need to tell you, but they'll pay for themselves almost immediately. So even if you have me do them, it's a good investment. But if you do that, then and you have people on staff that are interested in learning it, and that's really the best way to learn how to do it yourself and to do it well and to do it effectively. Now, on my website, there's something called the Andover Case Study, which you can print off. And that's Andover, New Hampshire, which went away from killing defense to beaver deceivers. And, like any town, it was only 6 or 7 sites, but they studied their expenses that they were putting into these roads and these sites over the years. And they figured that they're going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars in relatively short period of time by making that switch and not having to constantly battle the beavers at these sites. So please check that out if you're interested in that, the economic side of it.
Okay. One Why do the beavers not dam up the cages around the pipes?
Because they're well designed. Yeah, I mean, that requires a pretty extensive answer, but they have to be put together just right, and they have to be big filters. They have to have whirlpool brakes. I didn't mention it, but I think I showed some pictures. I mean, my whirlpool brakes now might cover the entire top of the filter, unlike those early model ones that were very small. And so you have to have it has to come in silently. The idea behind a big filter is that those water molecules pick up speed as they approach and enter the pipe, and then the beavers would sense that and they'd bury it. And so if you have a large perimeter on your filter, then those molecules, as they enter and pass that wall and get away from the beavers, are moving very slowly. So there's not much stimulation, and so you're eliminating those things. And then another variable that makes a pipe system robust is its length, because it's probably not as important as eliminating the damming stimuli. But beavers are programmed to look for leaks in dams, and so if you by using long pipe, you're essentially moving that leak a long way away from where the beavers expect it. Now, if you put a poor quality filter on the end of it, they will still bury it. But the combination of length and a large pipe as well, you just carry more of the water more of the time, and then a good filter, and you can defeat these beavers because they're not very smart, even though they give a lot of people that impression. You can always win. I can do any site. You can always defeat them, but never underestimate how much there is to it, and how sophisticated it has to be. It's a real unique form of engineering, and whatever engineer is doing it also has to know a lot about beavers and wetlands and hydrology, and so it appears simple, but it really isn't.
What is your what's your website, Skip?
Thanks for asking. Beaverdeceivers.com. And if you have any other questions for me or want to discuss the issue, it's my email is skip@beaverdeceivers, plural, beaverdeceivers.com.
Okay, I assume they can talk to you about costs and such like that.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Do you have any plans for your most recent deceiver?
Any new design ideas?
I think that's what the question.
Yeah, the next one. That's a very interesting question. I don't think so. I mean, I'm always learning. I'm still learning every year, every job. I'm still learning, and the basic lesson I learn every year is that I am not building these things well enough or big enough. But I'm not gonna go away from the square fence. That's I can perfect it. I can make it bigger. I can do anything with it. But that basic concept and the use of a wooden frame, no, it doesn't get any better than that. You have to clearly you have to protect the fencing from chewing, but that's not hard to do.
Okay, another kind of comment was, it seems like your design and the uses really comes down to your years of experience of thinking like a beaver. Has that come through observation, trial and error, or understanding of wetlands, or a combination?
Yeah, it's a big combination of everything. I got a fine education at the University of Maine at Orono. So there's a shout out to them. However, everything I've learned is just by doing a lot of grunt work and really, really a lot of very difficult work and just thinking about it constantly. And 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 I guess, you know, I had this before I went to the university. I even as a child, I mean, the first time I tossed my hook into a beaver pond and caught and this was huge for me, an 8-inch brook trout. I thought that was just a monster. But you know, the stream near the pond was so small, you know, you'd be lucky to catch it, you know, a 6-incher occasionally. So from that, and then I grew up on a beaver pond, and so I observed it all the time. I was a big time hunter and fisherman, and so for that reason, probably I was very interested in high quality habitats. And so from a very early age, I recognized that there was something real special about this, because the density of life, the movement, the diversity of species was so out of proportion to what you would see in the surrounding uplands. But that got, you know, at University of Maine, I studied wetlands, and so that got reinforced. And of course, for my thesis, I studied the fur trade and the effects it had on wetlands. And so I know that they disappear. They totally disappear in the absence of beavers. And so that knowledge and my commitment to wildlife habitat is so strong that I refuse to give up. I refuse to say, well, I guess you just have to kill them. And that has been a very important quality for me to endure all these decades of trial and error. But it's worth it. And I mean, it's so exciting, the opportunity out there. I mean, I've indirectly created thousands of acres of wetlands, and there's opportunities like that everywhere. I mean, we can make our landscape so much more productive for wildlife, and you know, and again, as I said, many species of game animals, and we can save a lot of money at the same time. So it's really exciting, and so you know, on the other hand, it's frustrating for me to see that you know, our society is very, very slow to move away from killing and basically battling beavers, and so I'm still hoping there's going to be a big sea change. And
okay, we've got one last question, and then we're going to have to go before the program kicks us out.
Okay.
Any issues with using pressure treated wood in the water, and if beavers do it, are they poisoned?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. It doesn't bother me at all. For one thing, you know, when I started the Penobscot Nation, I was cutting, or we were cutting cedar trees right off the land and building our frames that way, but they just don't. I wasn't satisfied with getting 8 years out of something. Too much effort goes into it. You want it to last 40 years. That's my feeling. And so, and then the quantity that goes into water is very small. It might be, you know, 2 or 4 posts. And my feeling is, if you can't build flow devices that work and that last, then you have to kill the beavers. And then you have to balance that really amazing, a huge ecological loss into that whole equation. And then on top of that, I did talk to 2 professors when I was working for the Penobscots at UMaine, and they both said that it was a very minor issue. The cells in the wood are very good at holding bad stuff. And then over the years, the pressure treated wood has become more and more benign. And then another thing to consider is that many of these watersheds, especially in more urban areas, might have hundreds of acres of pressure treated decks in them that the rainwater, you know, runs over. And that may not be a good thing, but it just puts it in perspective when I'm only talking about a couple posts. Now, having said all that, I'd be glad to switch to, you know, if it was proven that a couple posts is really bad, you know, in a watershed, I'd be glad to switch to, say, spruce. But you're just going to find yourself replacing those posts a lot more frequently.
Very good. Well, that ends the questions that I have currently. We do have, let's see, hopefully we can view your website after the administrator approves it. It has been flagged as inappropriate.
Yeah. What? It's not a porn site.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what he's getting at there, but.
That's funny.
In any case, Skip, thank you very much. And everyone that's on this Zoom call, this Zoom meeting, thank you again for your time. Again, everybody will have, as long as we get your email address and the right email address, and make sure you email Cindy. She put her email in the chat for you as well. We'll see that everybody gets the appropriate certificate to get your CEUs for your licenses. And Skip gave us his website and his email, so feel free to contact Skip if you have any more particular questions and want to discuss this further. Skip, thank you again for your time and your willingness to speak to us remotely.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been great, and we'll chat and do this again.
Okay, Ray. Thank you, and thank you all for coming to the presentation.
Thank you very much, folks, and I wish everybody a safe and Merry Christmas.
Same to you.